A Boeing 747 is twisting through the skies of Japan. Alarms screaming, oxygen masks falling, passengers scribbling last-minute notes to the people they love. And in the cockpit, 3 aviators are fighting, quietly, desperately, to keep a crippled giant alive. This is Japan Airlines Flight 123, carrying 524 souls, and destined to become the deadliest single aircraft accident in aviation history. How does a fully loaded 747, flown by an exceptionally experienced crew, lose control only minutes after takeoff? What hidden weakness inside the aircraft had been waiting, silently, for the right moment to fail? On the evening of August 12, 1985, nothing about Japan Airlines Flight 123 seemed unusual. The route from Tokyo's Haneda Airport to Osaka was one of the busiest in the country, barely an hour in the air, and with the Obon holiday underway, the cabin was filled to capacity. Families heading home, business travelers returning for a long weekend. It all looked like a perfectly ordinary summer departure. Up front, the cockpit was staffed by one of the most experienced 3-man crews JAL could assemble. In the left seat sat 39-year-old First Officer Yutaka Sasaki, acting as captain for this leg, part of the final evaluation required to upgrade him to full 747 captaincy. He had nearly 4,000 flight hours, 6 years on the jumbo, and tonight mattered. Beside him was the actual captain, Isami Takahama, age 49. He had been flying since 1966 and had accumulated over 12,000 hours, more than a decade of them on the 747. Behind them, at the engineers panel, was Hiroshi Fukuda, 46, bringing close to 10,000 flight hours and extensive time managing the aircraft's complex systems. On paper, few crews were better prepared. The weather was unsettled, yes, but nothing they hadn't seen before. Everything about Flight 123 appeared normal. But normal was only an illusion, because deep in the tail section, a long-forgotten injury was about to awaken. Every pressurized airliner lives under a simple rule. As the aircraft climbs, the cabin is filled with compressed air, and the structure must hold that pressure in. On a Boeing 747, the aluminum skin and several key internal walls flex slightly on every flight. Among them is the aft pressure bulkhead, a dome-shaped barrier that seals the cabin from the unpressurized tail section. It expands, contracts, and absorbs stress each time the aircraft takes off. Years earlier, this very 747 had suffered a tail strike while landing in Osaka, a hard impact that tore open the rear pressure bulkhead. The damage was severe enough that the jet was grounded and sent for major structural repairs. But during that repair, a critical mistake was made. Boeing's procedures called for a double-row splice, 2 reinforcing layers to restore strength. Instead, only 1 row was installed, leaving a hidden structural weakness. From the outside, the aircraft looked as good as new. It returned to service, flew normally, and over the years accumulated 12 agonizing and 319 cabin pressurization cycles. But with each cycle, each climb to altitude, microscopic cracks at that incorrect splice widened, almost imperceptibly. By August 12, 1985, the flaw had grown to the point where it could no longer contain the pressure. It merely needed one more flight, one more climb, to reach failure. And on that warm summer evening, as Flight 123 leveled off near 24,000 feet, the past finally came due. At 5:56 p.m., Flight 123 lifted off from Haneda, climbed over Tokyo Bay, and began its ascent toward 24,000 feet. For the first 12 minutes, everything looked routine. And then the aircraft reached the pressure level that pushed the weakened bulkhead past its limit. Without warning, the aft pressure bulkhead ruptured catastrophically. A violent blast of pressurized air surged into the tail, tearing open structural panels and blowing away a massive section of the vertical tail, including the rudder, the auxiliary power unit, and critical hydraulic lines routed through that area. Inside the cabin, the force ripped ceiling panels loose and hurled them into the opening at the rear. The sudden decompression dropped oxygen masks throughout the aircraft. Passengers grabbed for them in confusion and fear, most still unaware of how severe the damage truly was. In the cockpit, the cabin altitude warning horn blared. The captain immediately commanded a return to Tokyo and dialed the transponder to 7700, the universal distress code. But as First Officer Sasaki initiated a right turn, the 747 rolled far more steeply than it should have, and he couldn't bring the wings level again. Behind them, Flight Engineer Hiroshi Fukuda scanned his panels. One by one, the hydraulic gauges fell to zero, all 4 systems. He reported the worst possible news a 747 crew could hear. All indications are 0. With no hydraulic pressure, every major flight control surface, ailerons, elevators, rudder, was effectively dead. The crew could turn the yoke, push the pedals, but the airplane would no longer respond. And a powerless 747 doesn't fly straight. It begins to wander, swing, and heave through the air in ways few pilots ever trained to control. With the tail section gone and all hydraulics lost, the 747 no longer held a steady path. It began sliding into a Dutch roll, a slow, sweeping motion where the nose swings left and right while the wings rock in opposite rhythm. Without the stabilizing force of the vertical tail, Flight 123 drifted through the sky like a falling leaf. Passengers felt the oscillation immediately, some becoming nauseous as the aircraft swayed unpredictably. But the larger threat came from another motion altogether, a Phugoid cycle. Unable to control the elevators, the aircraft pitched up on its own, climbed, bled off speed, and then tipped forward into a rapid descent. As it picked up airspeed, the nose rose again, repeating the cycle over and over. Each oscillation cost the jet thousands of feet. Inside the cabin, the fear became tangible. Some passengers began writing farewell notes to their families. Flight attendants sprinted up and down the aisle, helping people secure their masks while grabbing breaths from spare oxygen lines whenever they could. One passenger captured a photo that would later become iconic. A flight attendant bent over, drawing oxygen from a dangling mask, surrounded by rows of passengers wearing theirs. It's one of the few images that reveal just how desperate those moments were. In the cockpit, though, all 3 pilots remained so focused on trying to regain control that they still hadn't donned their own oxygen masks. Hypoxia began dulling their thinking. Their responses to air traffic control grew shorter and then sporadic until some calls went unanswered altogether. And yet, despite the chaos and the lack of breathable air, the crew now faced an even greater challenge, finding a way to fly a 747 with nothing but engine thrust. With every flight control surface unresponsive, the only tools left were the 4 engines. It was a desperate idea, but the crew had no alternatives. By reducing thrust when the nose pitched upward, they could limit the climb. By increasing power during the dive, they could soften the descent. It wasn't elegant and it wasn't consistent, but after several attempts, timing, adjusting, correcting, the pilots managed to narrow the Phugoid cycle. The 747 still heaved through the sky, but the swings were less violent than before. Air traffic control suggested diverting to Nagoya, closer and easier to reach. Captain Takahama chose otherwise. If they managed to bring the airplane down, it wouldn't be a landing, it would be a controlled crash. Haneda had the resources they would need if they made it that far. Flight engineer Hiroshi Fukuda then offered another possibility. Drop the landing gear using gravity. Without hydraulics, the gear could fall into place under its own weight. The captain hesitated. It might destabilize what little control they had, but eventually agreed. The gear extended and the Phugoid eased slightly, though the Dutch roll became even more pronounced. Still, they pushed on. By advancing thrust on one side and reducing it on the other, the pilots slowly yawed the aircraft back toward Tokyo. And as the jet descended through 20,000 feet, the air grew denser, oxygen levels rose, and the fog of hypoxia began to lift. Thought processes sharpened again. That clarity led to a critical move. First Officer Sasaki suggested lowering the flaps using the standby electric system, a painfully slow method, but one that didn't require hydraulics. Inch by inch, the flaps deployed. And for the first time since the tail blew off, the 747 started to fly almost level. The violent oscillations softened, The aircraft impossibly was beginning to stabilize. Sensing a real chance, the crew called ATC and asked, "Where are we now?" And the answer offered the first genuine glimmer of hope. When the crew checked in again, Tokyo approach delivered news that should have been reassuring. Flight 123 was only 55 nautical miles northwest of Haneda. For a 747, even one badly damaged, that distance was survivable, if they could maintain control just a little longer. And for a brief moment, it looked possible. The aircraft was steadier, the Phugoid cycle softer, the crew thinking clearly again. But the situation was still fragile. As the electric flaps continued to deploy, they didn't extend symmetrically. The left wing's flaps lowered more than the right, generating extra lift on one side. Slowly, then more aggressively. The 747 began to roll to the right. Captain Takahama called for flaps 10, not realizing the flaps were already past 15 degrees and still moving. At the same time, First Officer Sasaki advanced the throttles, unintentionally setting more power on the left engines than the right. The mismatch in thrust amplified the imbalance in lift. The aircraft rolled even farther. Within seconds, the bank angle became extreme. The nose dropped, and the 747 slipped into a steep, unrecoverable descent, plummeting toward the mountains below at nearly 18,000 feet per minute. The crew pulled with all their strength, but with no hydraulic control surfaces left, nothing could arrest the fall. The right wing and its outboard engine struck a ridge first, tearing away instantly. The aircraft flipped inverted, smashed into the forested slope, and erupted into a massive fireball that witnesses on the ground described as sudden, violent, and final. Moments earlier, they had watched the jet staggering across the sky like a drunk, unable to hold a straight line, and then it was gone behind the ridgeline. The radar blip disappeared. ATC's calls went unanswered, and yet the tragedy of Flight 123 was not over, because what happened after the crash would add another layer of heartbreak. In the minutes after impact, Tokyo controllers tried repeatedly to contact Flight 123, but no one answered. The radar return had vanished. A U.S. Air Force aircraft flying nearby offered to join the search almost immediately, yet Japanese authorities declined the assistance. They believed, incorrectly, that no one could have survived the crash. That assumption proved devastating. Rescue teams were not sent into the mountains until the following morning, nearly 12 hours after the aircraft went down. When medical personnel finally reached the site, several victims showed clear signs that they had lived for some time after the impact. Doctors later stated that additional passengers might have survived had help arrived sooner. Out of the 524 people aboard, only 4 survived, all seated toward the rear of the aircraft in an area that escaped total destruction. It was a miracle, but also a reminder that others might have joined them if the response had been faster. The aftermath reshaped both industry and airline. Boeing redesigned the 747's aft structure to prevent another bulkhead failure and added hydraulic fuses so a single rupture couldn't drain every system at once. Japan Airlines tightened its maintenance oversight and faced a steep collapse in public confidence. Bookings fell by more than a third in the weeks that followed. Even today, Flight 123 remains the deadliest single aircraft accident in aviation history. And one of its most enduring lessons is now foundational. In any crash, no matter how hopeless the wreckage appears, rescue teams must assume someone is alive and act without delay. Japan Airlines 123 is a chain of failures stretched across years. A hard landing, a flawed repair, and finally a rescue delayed when time mattered most. But from the tragedy came stronger aircraft, stricter maintenance standards, and a global commitment to fast, aggressive search and rescue. What part of this story strikes you the most? The technical flaw, the human struggle, or the decisions made afterward? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. And if you'd like to explore more events that reshaped aviation history, don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you in the next episode.